Hello everyone, my name is Dane Joseph and I'm honored to share with you how students' statistics education can benefit from ethics engagement. First, thank you to all the wonderful people that made ECOTS 2020 a success, including any who are not mentioned on this slide. For this presentation, I'll abbreviate statistics and data science as SDS, even though I'm well aware that there are fundamental and essential differences between them. You've likely encountered at least one research study, news article, or blog post, or perhaps YouTube video of an egregious or questionable case of moral values within SDS. These usually include some primary or secondary moral values clashing with one another. Before we continue, let's assume that for this conversation, we're referring to those cases where moral values, ethical tools, decision frameworks, and the like are used to guide SDS decisions and not the other way around as in some subjects. Let's also assume that because social agents are deeply embedded in complex cultural, economic, and political networks, wisdom, or the value or quality of using knowledge and experience for good judgment, and knowledge itself are moral values laden. And because of this, the stakes attached to good judgments are increased. Let's also assume that engagement is distinct from motivation and achievement. If engagement were a vehicle for reaching learning outcomes, it might not necessarily be the most effective means of transportation. High engagement can certainly motivate learners to attend more to task-relevant learning outcomes, and in some manner increase learner expectations. But by itself, high engagement does not necessarily increase the value one has for a task. Because of this, higher engagement does not always lead to overall greater motivation or even to higher achievement. Stories can often facilitate high engagement with learners, especially when dealing with complex values-laden content. But in order to frame and solve story problems, the abundance of information within stories imposes a heavy cognitive load associated with reading a story. This leads to a recipe for high engagement and low learning, and so two different learners can go vastly different ways with story narrative meaning and purpose. Thankfully, heavy cognitive load can be alleviated via guided discovery and feedback by using case studies that include worked examples and case commentaries that provide expert analysis, synthesis, and evaluation of moral problems and solutions to SDS professional practice. As learners progress up the expertise ladder, they can be given fewer explicit cues from the case study commentaries and forced to do the moral problem solving and problem framing themselves. Instructors should explicitly model proper moral reasoning demanded by the desired learning outcomes to provide a powerful cognitive apprenticeship model, which helps students facilitate better metacognition in a scaffolded but also socially important way. After all, more and more SDS professionals are working with legal teams, ethics professionals, and a host of other subject matter specialists. Systematic ethical decision-making frameworks are more often correct and logically defensible. However, as the world is terribly complex and unapologetic about when it places people in moral quandaries and leaves little time for moral resolution, such frameworks are very limited. These are good reasons for training intuitive decision-making frameworks using heuristics and biases to one's advantage. But because intuition can often lead us astray, or as Haidt describes it, the elephant leading the rider, a moral dual processing approach to SDS ethics education can be especially beneficial to overcome the limitations of hyper-rational or hyper-intuitive approaches. Personally, I've always taught statistics to students in education, psychology, and the social sciences. I've had great success exploring case studies of value-added growth models being used to evaluate teaching success or make determinations on teachers' future employment. We'd explore issues from the just election of the right predictor and moderator variables to the infringement of teachers' privacy rights with respect to how and when their classroom data was being used, as well as the fair interpretation of nested model fitting results. But when I come across a case that is too hard to leave out of my classroom, and I don't necessarily have the work example or case commentary to accompany it, I rely on faculty peers to be guest speakers in my classroom. In this cognitive, social, and collaborative model, we'd work out the key issues beforehand in order to be as cogent as possible in front of the students and to facilitate ample practice and assess it formatively. In summary, our students need to be able to situate the role that ethics plays contextually within SDS initiatives, using communication about values to make connections that are culturally relevant around commitments such as promoting justice, to be better consumers of research, if not themselves scientists who purposefully collect, produce, curate, analyze, model, and report data to relevant stakeholders. Many of the problems that a data scientist or statistician faces will be of the wicked type, i.e., one not necessarily solvable by a clearly defined pathway with technical acumen. Emphasizing moral dual processing is important in their educational journey, and ethics must be deliberately and repeatedly integrated, not just as another course taken along the journey, but as an essential facet of one's intellectual and social development taken within the journey of SDS professional education, making SDS and ethics education a symbiosis with case studies as a vehicle for engagement. Thank you, and God bless. Stay safe and be well, everyone.